In Guild Wars 2, the Druid has always been one of the best healers, most recently an alacrity healer. Probably one of the best for dealing with overall mechanics on landscape, strikes and raids. But after the patch in June, Heal Druid is dead for the time being. It definitely needs a bit of fixing, but an incredible build has come out of the patch. The DPS Condition Druid build. Let's have a look at why it's just so damn good. I want to preference this by saying that I do expect ANET to have a look at Heal Druid again, and I do think will be viable in some time in the future. They had a few good ideas, they just didn't implement it properly, and it's just not at the place it could be. But let's not get into that for now, let's look at the build in front of us. So how good of a build is this? Well, at current point, it's doing about second on the DPS benchmark with the elite people benchmarking. It does rely a lot on Astral Force generation, but it's quite a simple rotation if you can get the hang of it. As long as you're doing DPS and doing some sort of healing output on the group, you can keep up Astral Force pretty much the whole time and therefore pump out some massive DPS. We're looking currently at about 38 to 42k quite comfortably. So the positives basically being a monster truckload of DPS, a very simple rotation, and quite a fun class to play in general. The downside is this, it's Condition DPS as normal, so this means that it's going to struggle in some power fights. The other downside is that it relies heavily on certain CC dazes and immobes. This can kind of affect you on some fights that don't want you to do big CC, but other than that, it's a fairly fun build to use. Let's have a look at the build. There's not much flexibility in build. In skirmishing, you're definitely going to want sharp edges for the extra bleeds on crits. You're going to want hidden barbs so that you basically have increased damage on your bleeds, and light on your feet. Light on your feet because you want the short bow to be able to pierce, and also you want the extra damage from short bow skills, as well as increased damage and durations on conditions when dodging. And then we're going to go to Wilderness Survival. First of all, Taste of Danger. Getting extra expertise and vitality. This also means that you might want to get yourself a Jadebot core tier 10 to try get as much vitality and therefore get as much expertise. If you don't have a core or a high enough core, you can always use a few expertise infusions to get yourself to the 90% mark. We also want to take ambidextrous for the extra condition damage as well as the extra condition damage while using our dagger. Then for our final capstone, Poison Master. Mostly for just a bit of extra poison damage while using our beast ability, not really too much into that. And then into Druid. Blood Moon's the most important skill in this trait tree. Every time we daze or immob an enemy or disable them, we basically add bleeding. We also do a daze when we enter Celestial Avatar. This is why most of our majority of our skills will do immobs, dazes or stuns to try and proc this bleed damage as often as possible. Natural Balance, obviously a very good skill now. It gives you extra condition damage as well as condition duration. Remember, this condition duration doesn't stack above our expertise. This is why we're aiming for 90% bleed duration on our condition damage. Then on the final capstone, Eclipse. Eclipse adds extra conditions to our Celestial Avatar skills, basically making them offensive, which is why we're going to get a lot of utility going into Celestial Avatar for some DPS. A few major and minor traits that synchronize really well is with Tailwind and with Furious Grip. When swapping weapons, we're getting Swiftness and Fury. Hunter's Tactics doing increased damage and getting increased crit chance when attacking from behind or from the flanks. Obviously, we want to try get this increased crit chance to proc more bleeds from sharpened edges. Light on your feet. Every time you dodge, you get an extra condition duration and extra damage. This is an important skill to use because we're getting extra vigor from natural vigor as well as extra protection when dodge rolls, allowing us to dodge not just to get extra DPS but to get extra survivability. And now into the equipment. Very important to note which pieces need to be Sinisters and which pieces need to be Wipers. We obviously want to use Rune of the Create for the extra bleed duration as well as the extra condition damage. This is a very important part as we want to try and get our bleed expertise up to 90% with food. You can notice that mine's a little bit shy. I might need to either use some expertise infusions or just get a better Jade core as mine's only tier 1 and the tier 10 will take me up towards the 90% mark. Your weapons are obviously Vipers and you've got Bursted Sigil and Earth on the bow, And on the axe and dagger, you want to have geomancy and earth. You also want to make sure that you're switching weapons off of cooldown to proc these abilities. It's a very important part of this build, is trying to switch weapons to try and make sure that you're not only proccing that, but you're also getting as much utility out of your trade tree as possible. For food and utilities, there's only one way to go really on both of them. For food, you want condition damage, expertise. You can kind of use something like koi cakes if you adjust your build substantially, although I don't recommend it. I would always say go for the standard build if possible, but this is obviously a cheaper build. And for utilities, you need to go for the toxic fusing crystals. This will give you the most DPS possible. You can use a cheaper version of the tuning icicles, but you're not going to hit as hard. So there's kind of a bit of play in both of them. But basically you want to try to get as much condition damage as possible, and obviously get your expertise to 90% bleed duration. Let's talk about rotation for a bit. Those who know me know I don't like to talk too much about rotation as I'm not the best player. But let's have a talk about the concept at least. First of all, we have to swap weapons off of cooldowns. We want to proc the sigils as much as possible, as well as getting some of those extra boons from our trait tree. Second of all, what we want to do is go into Celestial Avatar almost off of cooldown. This does mean that we need to burst DPS and healing to try and build up Celestial Avatar as much as possible. This can be quite hard sometimes, especially in certain fights. Therefore, maybe consider switching out your healing skill for something like Water Spirit to try and get as much healing and DPS in between phases as possible. You want to try use skill 2 of Axe and Bow 2 to 3 times per rotation. When going into Celestial Avatar, your mindset needs to be to try use skill 5 and 3, but to try weave in 2 Celestial Avatar 2s. What you can do is, if you have enough DPS and healing to go into Celestial Avatar as easily as possible, try to make sure to use one of your utilities while doing this. What this means is this: going in and out of Celestial Avatar will cancel most skills. It won't cancel certain skills like Celestial Avatar, but it won't cancel your utility skills that you use. So while going into some Celestial Avatar, you can say drop your spike trap and it won't interrupt it. So what you need to try do is, if you want to stay for a second Celestial Avatar 2, to try use utility skills if you have them ready while waiting for your second Celestial Avatar 2 to go off cooldown. But if this is a problem, just use one. Try to only stay in Celestial Avatar long enough for a skill 5 and a 3. If you can get in 2 2s while you're doing it, that's brilliant, but if not, don't waste your Celestial Avatar form. And the reason is this, is that it's quite hard to build up sometimes Celestial Avatar, especially in certain fights. You don't want to waste it by staying in it too long and then not having it ready for your next rotation. And if you're a new player, the idea is also almost just use almost every skill off of cooldown, using all your utilities as well as your pet skill off of cooldown. The reason is this, is that we want as much DPS as possible, and a lot of these won't interrupt other skills. In fact, they'll just carry on stacking above. If you're a more advanced player, you might want to save certain utilities for going in and out of Celestial Avatar or waiting for your Celestial Avatar 2, but knowing when to do that does require quite a high skill level. As for the short bow, our priorities are obviously skill 2 with flank. Make sure you always hit this from flank or behind, skill 4 and then skill 5. Skill 4 has to be hit from flank to get the emote to proc Blood Moon, as well as skill 5 to proc your Blood Moon. Skill 1 you obviously just use to auto attack as well as good bleed, and it pierces, so make sure if you can line up 2 targets with each other to try and make sure that you pierce one target into another. Skill 3 is obviously a little bit of swiftness, but if not, just the evade frame. Make sure you use this in strikes and fights where you know that you're going to require some extra dodges. For the Axe Dagger, the most important skill is obviously number 2 by a mile, as it's big bleed damage. Skill 3 for a bit of extra bleed and a bit of soft CC, and skill 4 for the extra poison damage. But just notice that skill 4 is going to change your location. So just be making sure that you're readjusting yourself every single time you use skill 4, or don't use it when you think that you might move into a mechanic that could kill you. You can use Crippling Talon whenever you want, just for a bit of gap fill, and remember it's got quite a far range, so if you need to use this while moving, it's also a fairly decent skill to use. Just a few things to be aware of. For some reason Dagger 4, even though it's an evade frame, doesn't proc lights on your feet, where Shortbow 3 does proc lights on your feet, as well as obviously dodging. Also do notice that Rugged Growth heals you and your pet, and this will help you generate some celestial avatar. So sometimes you might need to readjust and actually take a little bit of damage before using a heal skill to try proc as much celestial avatar as possible. Remember, maintaining as much celestial avatar growth as possible makes this do its DPS. If you do struggle, you won't do as much DPS by a long shot. And with that said, let's have a look at some utilities. Definitely We Healers 1 is a very good personal utility to use. You can use Water Spirit as well as Healing Spring if you do need to get some extra celestial avatar or some extra cleansers. We definitely want Signet of the Wild to use for the immobilized stacks for the extra DPS, not for the veracity. We want Spike Trap because we're focusing heavily on bleeds. This just is extra DPS for us. Sharpening Stones is probably one of the best sources of bleeds and one that you should be using off of cooldown, as all these utilities should be almost. Entangle is probably one of the strongest skills in this build. High bleed stacks and immobilizers. Most of these are non-negotiable, but you can switch out Spike Trap with some extra things that you might want to take. Other utilities that you could consider is obviously the Glyph of Equality for group-wide stab, daze, and also a stun break. Glyph of Alignment for some extra DPS as well as some Condi Cleanse. Glyph of Tides to still have your push or your pull. And Stone Spirit. Aegis and obviously a small bit of prot can be fairly helpful. There are a few of the old regulars that are still interesting to take, like your Search and Rescue and so on and so forth, but that can just be determined whether you want that on landscape or not. Now, how do I personally feel about the state of Druid in Guild Wars 2? Of course, I'm saddened by the fact that Heal Druid is no longer really viable. I feel like with a bit of better might and alacrity uptime and maybe a couple of charges on spirits, Druid could move to the place of meta healing and fractals, and I'd love to see that happen, where there is this change out of Healbrand towards something else. But at the state that it's in, Druid Healer is just not really viable. It can maybe do a bit of healing, but its boons are just not there, and it's just not as good as some of the other options, whether you look at Healer Lakmed or even Tempest. At this point in time, Heal Druid is just not viable. I like the idea of the Condition Druid. I think it's a brilliant step. Condition Soul Beast has not really been at the state that it needs to become viable or competitive to other classes in raiding and also in fractals and strikes. So I'd love to see Condition Druid stay in the position it's in. Probably will get a bit of a little nerf every now and then because it is really performing pretty high. But like I said, it's not exactly God tier. If you have to move too much or you can't generate Celestial Avatar, you will struggle to maintain some good DPS. But in fights where the boss are very stationary or there's this constant ticking damage that you can heal for a little bit of extra Celestial Avatar generation, you're going to be hitting like an absolute train. I hope this guide has been useful, and I hope that it can help you get your gameplay in Guild Wars 2 to a better level. And I'm really glad for all the support I've been receiving on Discord and on YouTube. Thank you so much, guys. See you in the next one. Cheers. For more on this build and others just like it, catch me streaming on Twitch. Stop by anytime and hang out. If you found this helpful, please subscribe and share with some friends. It will really help grow the channel.